I want to read you something. I dream the way a radio dreams, not of songs, but of the space between stations. That thin, patient hush where the world forgets to explain itself and the air becomes a mouth held open. That is a small snippet from the poem that I used to win the VCCS Poet Laureate competition. It was entitled The Frequency That Looks Back. And I'm reading it not to brag. I do promise that that's not what this is. But because I think it's a piece that I've written that touches deeply into who I am. Now, I've written about what cosmic horror actually feels like from the inside. Not as a genre, not as a set of conventions, but as a feeling that has been with me for, honestly, as long as I can remember. The space between stations, the mouth held open, that is where I find myself living as a writer. And that is what this episode is about. Welcome back to Ink and Entropy. I am Connor Mancuso. This is episode 3. Last time we talked about why horror matters as a genre. We went into the psychology, the culture, the craft. Today I want to go a little more narrow and honestly a lot more personal to myself. Today I want to talk about cosmic horror specifically, why it grabbed me, why it won't let go, and what it actually looks like from the inside when you're not only someone who reads it obsessively, but loves building entire universes around and out of it, both on paper and just in my imagination. This one will be a shorter episode than episode 2, more of a focused dive than a full survey of sorts. Think of it less as a lecture and more you and I sitting across from one another and just me telling you about the thing and things that I just can't stop thinking about. So I want to start by clearing something up because I think cosmic horror can tend to get misrepresented even by people who love it. Cosmic horror is not just about scary stuff in space. It's not only about tentacles, it's not only about Cthulhu sleeping at the bottom of the ocean, even though Lovecraft's work is obviously pivotal and central to the tradition. And it's also not just about monsters that are big, but that does play a key factor. It's about insignificance. And I don't mean that in a depressing and nihilistic way, which a lot of outside viewers of cosmic horror or a lot of subgenres of horror in general can look at it that way. But it can be that. I mean it in the most specific and precise way I possibly can. Cosmic horror is a genre that takes seriously the idea that the universe is not organized around human beings. There are forces and entities and truths out there that are so far beyond our scale, not just physically, but conceptually, to the point where our minds genuinely cannot hold them, and the attempt to hold them would fracture our sanity, and that is where the horror lives. Lovecraft said it best. He called it the terrifying vistas of reality. Now, I would put it slightly differently. I would say it's somewhere along the lines of the horror of opening a door and realizing that the room behind it has no walls. The room just keeps going. and something in there has already noticed you. That is the genre. That is the feeling. And I have been chasing that feeling my entire writing life, or as long as I have been writing. Now, I didn't grow up reading Lovecraft. I want to be honest about that, because I think there is a sort of mythology around cosmic horror writers where there's this misconception that there's a claim that they discovered Cthulhu at age 9 and it changed their life. And while that may be true for some, that's not my story. But Lovecraft did play a pivotal role in how I developed my writing and my style. My story tends to be that I came at it sort of sideways, whether that be through fantasy, through mythology, through parts of folklore that don't necessarily resolve cleanly, through the stories that end with the protagonist walking away not triumphant but just changed, quieter, with something behind their eyes that wasn't there before. I kept gravitating toward the thing that was too big to look at directly. The god that didn't have a face, the forest that swallowed people not out of malice but out of complete indifference to whether they were there at all. There's something in me that has always been drawn to the edge of what our language can hold. And when I finally found the quote-unquote tradition of cosmic horror as a named thing, as a genre with a history and set of writers and a philosophy behind it, it felt less like a discovery to me and more like a recognition. Like, oh, this is what I've been trying to write. This is what I've been circling without knowing it had a name. Now, here for me is what separates cosmic horror from every other subgenre of horror. Because generally speaking, I'm an avid fan of almost all subgenres of horror with the exception of one or two, but that's for another time. Most horror operates on a human scale. The threat is human shaped, or at least human adjacent. It wants something from you, whether that be your life, your sanity, your soul. It has an agenda, and that agenda, even when it's terrible, is something that you can orient yourself against. You can fight it, you can flee from it, you can bargain with it, or you can understand it. With the exception of sanity, cosmic horror removes those options. The entities in cosmic horror, more often than not, don't want anything from you. They don't hate you. They don't love you. They don't even necessarily know you exist. And you're like an ant to them. It would be not worth their time to acknowledge your existence. And that is so much more terrifying than a monster with a motive. Because at least the monster with that motive is comprehensible. You can visualize it, you can understand it, you can determine its motives. At least you're significant enough to be its target. In cosmic horror, the worst possible thing isn't that something is coming to kill you. It's that you might catch the attention of something that will look at you the way you look at bacteria on a dish if you're a biologist, or if you're a kid with a magnifying glass looking at ants. Not with cruelty, but with the most casual, disinterested curiosity imaginable. And then go back to what it was doing before. That distinction between malevolence and indifference, while not the whole genre, is a very large part of the genre of cosmic horror. And it is something that I think about constantly and consistently when I am writing, particularly in cosmic horror. In my universe, in the Loom, the world is a textile. Reality is a cloth under constant tension. And the entity, which will remain unnamed until the novel comes out, the malevolent god at the center of my mythos, it isn't evil in any human sense. It's not trying to hurt anyone. It's hungry. It's a function. It eats what it touches the way fire eats oxygen, not out of cruelty, just out of it is what it is. And to me, that can be so much more frightening than a villain with a plan. Not discrediting well-written victims and villains and other subgenres of horror, but you can defeat a villain. You can't defeat a fundamental property of existence. Well, not without some plot armor, at least. Now, this is the part I don't really tend to talk about enough, and I want to talk about it here because I think it's a key to understanding why this genre grabbed me specifically. And you can argue against this. In some ways, I feel like cosmic horror at its core is a language problem. The defining feature of the best cosmic horror writing is that it's always reaching for something that language cannot quite contain. Lovecraft himself wrote about the unnameable, the entity or force or truth that resists description, not because the writer is being lazy, but because description would diminish it. Because the moment you name something, you've put a fence around it. You've told the reader it's this big and no bigger. It fits in these words and no other. It does this thing and no other. The best cosmic horror, in my opinion, refuses that fence. And that's exactly what cosmic poetry is trying to do. Cosmic poetry is language straining against its own limits. It's words trying to point at something that words cannot fully say. You use rhythm and image and sound to gesture towards a truth that a plain sentence would flatten. Now, why am I talking about poetry all of a sudden? If you know anything about my writing, almost all of my writing is done in a free-form poetic prose. So this is me kind of building off of that and explaining some of the love I have for cosmic horror, my writing style, etc. So, to turn back around on that, for me, as a poet who writes cosmic horror, and as a cosmic horror writer who writes poetry, these two things are not separate. They are the same impulse in different forms. Both are trying to describe it, the vast finding, the precise image that makes you feel the vastness, rather than just understand it. When I wrote The Frequency That Looks Back, the poem that I submitted and wrote for the Poet Laureate contest, I was doing cosmic horror in verse, as I have done for the entirety of time, for the most part of my writing. The black star that listens instead of shines. The ceiling as a lid over something breathing. The constellations rearranging like polite furniture for a guest who never announces themselves. Those are cosmic horror images. I just built them out of line breaks instead of prose. And when I'm writing fiction, so for instance, my Sea Meter series, serial series on Substacks. So when I'm writing Varys in the catacombs, pressing his fingers to the inside of his wrist where the thread mark lives, listening to the loom hum sideways, that's poetry in a different form of container. The genre and the form are the same thing to me. I didn't just choose one, I found both. But onto what I've learned writing it. I've been building my interconnected universe for a while now, essentially since I started writing and started my first words. The Loom, which is the essential deity of my writings universe. I would say the Nithirus trilogy, which was the original trilogy of books I was going to write, which has been shelved for quite a while. The fragments or microfiction I've written, all of the books I've written, the novella I'm working on, which, if I'm being honest, is currently eating me alive in the best way possible. It's gruesome and visceral and descriptive in the most fundamental way. And to not go off on a tangent, here's what I've learned about writing cosmic horror that nobody really told me going in. The biggest mistake that I think people make with this genre is going too big, too fast. That doesn't mean that you can't do that and it be a great story. Everyone wants to write the god. Everyone wants to write the moment of cosmic revelation and the scene where the protagonist finally sees what's really there and their mind shatters. And that scene is important. But it only works, it only lands if you've spent the story building the human who breaks, the one who discovers it. Because here's sort of a paradox of cosmic horror. You can't just make someone feel the vastness of the universe without first making them feel the smallness of the person. The reader has to be inside a body, inside a life, inside a set of fears and love and habits that are completely and specifically human before you pull the rug out from under them. In Falling Stars Don't Make Wishes, the horror isn't the alien. It's the flashlight, the mug warm in your hands, the dog barking like it's rehearsing for an apocalypse it can't afford. The whole story lives in those small human details. And they're what make the moment when the stars start going out feel like your sky is going dark, not just some character's sky. That's the craft. Building the small things so carefully that when the vast thing arrives, it lands with the weight of everything the small thing was worth. And the other thing I've learned, restraint. Always restraint. The entity you don't fully describe tends to be always more frightening than the one you do. The thing that presses its forehead against the inside of reality like a beast tearing through a door. You don't need to see it. The pressure is enough. The implication is enough. I think about that more often than not. What to show, what to withhold, where the line between giving the reader enough to be afraid and giving them so much that fear becomes manageable. The void is scariest when you can't see the bottom. So, in conclusion, cosmic horror, the space between stations, the vast attention moving through ordinary things the way wind moves through tall grass, not to harm, but to confirm, something that practices being nearby, moving through your sleep. I truly love this genre because it takes the things that I find genuinely fascinating and terrifying. Not just monsters, not just death, but the insignificance in the face of something immense and turns it into art. It holds the thing I can't look at directly and it makes a frame around it. Not to make it safe, just to make it visible. And honestly, I think that's what all writing is for at its best. You find the thing that's too big to say plainly, and you find the image, the line, the story, the fragment that makes the reader feel it in their chest without being able to explain exactly why. That's what I'm chasing every time I sit down to write. Every time I build another piece of the loom. Every time I set a thread bearer into a catacomb that smells like rendered devotion. Every time I put a character on a back porch at night and let them make the mistake of looking up. The frequency that looks back is always there. I just want to be the one standing close enough to hear it. So that's episode 3 of Ink and Entropy. Again, it was a short one this time, but I knew I was going to make an episode about cosmic horror eventually at some point, and truth be told, I could have spent hours talking about it, and maybe we'll do an expanded episode at some point. But I wanted to be a little more focused rather than sprawling. If you want to read any of the work I referenced today, it's all over on my Substack at connormancuso.substack.com. I would love it if you go read it, tell me what you think, give me your thoughts, tell me what you like, tell me what you dislike, tell me what you want to see, don't want to see. I can't promise I'll do it all, but I can promise I'll read it all. And if this episode was enjoyable for you, if you liked what I had to say, share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. That's genuinely one of the best things that you can do for this podcast right now with how small it is. So next episode, we go somewhere new. So keep your ears open and keep wandering the maze with me. Goodbye.